So good evening, everyone, and I'd like to ask you to join me in Gasho. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu. And thank you for joining us again for our fall lectures. And we've been going over the Dhammapada, but I'm actually going to hijack today's lessons. I'm going to, I do have some of the things working better now, I think. I've actually gone back to using what I was doing before we put in all this newfangled equipment. So I think it's easier for me to control right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you what I was hoping to share with you last time, but I was unable to. So you can all see this on your screen, can you? Yes? Yeah? Okay. So I was mentioning last time about this Emma or Yama, because we were talking about Yama. And, Yama was a Hindu deity, but then got carried over to Buddhism and was carried over in China and Japan. But in Japan, or through China, he ended up getting this name Emma, or sometimes referred to as Emma Daio. Daio means great king or great lord. And the one on the left is more traditional of the kind of person you might see him figure as. This very intense looking figure. And he's actually dressed up like the Chinese court judge would have been looking like back around 700 AD, I believe it was. And you can see he's got this brush and scroll in front of him. And you see these beings that are being tortured. What he's doing is basically judging them after they pass away to where they're going to end up going. And so on the scroll are all the activities that a person has done through their lives, both good and bad. And depending on that, you go through to different areas. So with this, of course, the folklore that came about with this was that when a person passed away, they go through seven-day periods, and there are different adjudicators throughout this period, and they either send you directly to what we call the heavenly realm or to the realm of hell, or you could continue on this journey. So, and basically they talk about things like, how greedy you were, how lustful you were, how much you lied throughout your life, and so all these things become factors. And every seventh day, you're on this journey through basically what's known sort of like the purgatory, and hopefully you're able to continue on this journey. And that's why in the Japanese tradition, they have every seventh day after they pass away, they have the special services, and that's to help them continue on the journey, right? But over the course of time in pop culture, of course, everything in Japanese becomes animated, and on the right-hand side here, you can see a very cute version of Emma. And this is from a very popular cartoon that they have in Japan, and how he has become one of the characters in there. Also, probably one of the most popular animations in the world is called One Piece, and there's a character in there called Emma as well. And so these are, so just to tell you what Emma is, he's the ruler of the underworld, both Jigoku, which is hell, and Meido, which is purgatory. And he's the foremost of the 13 judges of the dead. He dresses in the robes of ancient government official from Chinese Tang dynasty. And again, his chief duty was to judge the souls of the newly dead and send them on their way to their final location, or their next locations, if you will. Now, as with Buddhist folklore in Japan, most of these, what we call sort of evil, or not even evil, they have an actual true body, which is usually a bodhisattva or a Buddha. Okay, so this is actually one of the teachings of Buddhism, is that sometimes you teach with a gentle stroke, and sometimes you teach with a slap. Okay, so it can be either harsh or it could be gentle, all right, depending on what's needed at the time. So this Emma is said to be a figure of the real spirit of Emma is said to be what we call Jizo. So I wanted to talk to you today about this Jizo Bosatsu. Okay, the true form of Emma is a bodhisattva named Jizo Bosatsu. And Jizo is a fascinating character. The origin does come from India. In India, it was known as Ksitagarbha Bodhisattva. And when we talk about these bodhisattvas, like Ksitagarbha Bodhisattva, we're generally talking about what we call Mahayana Buddhism. Okay, so in Buddhism, there was two major branches of Buddhism. One we presently call Theravada. Theravada means the way of the elders, and it tends to be a little bit more orthodox. But it also was a way, so the early Buddhist movement was a way to free oneself or liberate oneself from suffering. Okay, but the main focus was generally on the self. But as Buddhism progressed through the ages, it couldn't remain isolated in such a manner. In other words, because Buddhism also is part of a society, it had to have a societal component to it, which meant it had to reach out to others. And this is where the Mahayana movement really starts to develop. So things like social justices, movements to help the local community, right? And so in Mahayana Buddhism, compassion is very much emphasized. So Mahayana Buddhism is based on what we call the Bodhisattva practices. And that whole ideal of Bodhisattva is an individual who has completed all the practices that they need in order to become a Buddha, but instead of becoming a Buddha, they forego their enlightenment and they commit to saving all other beings. So the Bodhisattva states that until all beings are saved, they will not attain enlightenment themselves. Okay? And there are many different bodhisattvas in the Mahayana teachings. And some of the more famous ones, one of them is this Jizo Bosatsu in Japan. Another one that's very popular is Kannon, or Kuan-yin in Chinese, Bodhisattva of compassion, right? And then there's one called, in Japanese, we call Seishi Bosatsu, which is the Bodhisattva of wisdom. Wisdom and compassion going hand in hand. They are often the attendants of Amida Buddha. When we see in other Pure Land temples statues of Amida Buddha, usually it's called the Amida Triad, and there's three statues usually. The Amida Buddha in the center, and accompanying that Buddha, the two attendants, Seishi and Kanno. These are bodhisattvas. And there are the bodhisattvas are symbolic of various things. So Seishi is wisdom, Kannon is known as the Bodhisattva, compassion. And what's interesting about these Bodhisattvas, they will also take on different gender roles. So in historically, Kannon Bodhisattva from India, Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, was male in India. But as it moved to China, there was a deity in China, a female deity, who was the deity of children, or guardian of children. And Kannon took on that image in China. So Kannon then becomes very feminine in China. And as you get over to Japan, it continues on to be quite feminine. So when you see statues of Kannon Bodhisattva, the curvatures of the statue are more feminine than masculine. But, and in fact, an interesting side is that during what we call the Kamakura period, there was a period where Christianity was banned from Japan and persecuted. So there was they called it Maria Kannon. And what it is it's the Kannon Bodhisattva, but it's actually Mother Mary, the mother of Jesus Christ. And this statue, if you look at it, it looks very feminine. It looks like the Virgin Mary, actually. And there's images of this Bodhisattva carrying a child, for instance. So very similar. But by claiming that it was this Kannon, the Christians avoided persecution. So they were having Christian gatherings secretly and calling themselves Buddhists, but they were actually and they were using this Kannon as a figure. But anyways, setting that aside. So today I wanted to talk to you about this Jizo Bosatsu. Jizo in Sanskrit is known as Kshitigarbha Bodhisattva. And when we take a look at the word Jizo itself, Ji means earth, and Zo means storehouse, womb, or repository of treasure. So, and Bodhisattva, as I mentioned, is one who aspires for Bodhi or enlightenment, but who has foregone their own enlightenment until all beings have been liberated from their sufferings. And so the Bodhisattvas all have, they call it the 4 Bodhisattva vows, and they're common to any Bodhisattva. And therefore, when you look at the actions of the Bodhisattva, they are actually quite similar from one to the other. It's because they have these 4 common vows that all Bodhisattvas make. First one is the sentient beings are infinite in number. I vow to liberate them all. Okay? So we hear of, in our Pure Land school of Buddhism, we talk about Amida Buddha. And before Amida Buddha became Amida Buddha, he was a Bodhisattva. In Japanese, we call it Hozo Bosatsu. In Sanskrit, it's Dhammakara Bodhisattva. But again, we know that Amida Buddha, when he was in the stage of Bodhisattva, made what we call the 48 vows. And of those 48 vows, the 18th vow, we call it the primal vow, or the Hongan in Japanese. That's where the term Honganji comes for our temple. It's the temple of the primal vow. And that vow, he states again, is that he will not attain enlightenment unless all sentient beings are liberated. So that's common to all bodhisattvas. Okay? And then the second one is defilements are infinite in number. I vow to extinguish them all. Okay? So this is more, so the first one is more about helping others. The second one is more about self-reflection. So in the bodhisattva practice, knowing that defilements are infinite, but they vow to eradicate them all. The Dharma gates are infinite in number. I vow to enter them all. So basically, there are many different teachings, and I vow to learn each and every one. And finally, the Buddha's path is unsurpassable. I vow to attain it. So ultimately, to attain enlightenment. So this Jizō Bosatsu, we find there is a text. I think it's very more popular in China and later in Japan than it was in prior Buddhism, but it's known as the Ksitagarbha Sutra. And it tells the story of how this, I'm going to say Jizō because that's the Japanese pronunciation. It's easier for me to say that pronunciation. So it tells of how Jizō becomes a bodhisattva. And it's very interesting because it talks about at the beginning how the historical Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, was at one time up at the Tavatimsa heaven. This is, in the realms of suffering, I talk about the heavenly realms as well, the top of the six realms of suffering. This is one of the 6 heavenly realms, Tavatimsa heaven. And this is where it was said that Queen Maya, when she passed away, she went to this existence. So the Buddha, Shakyamuni, when he attained enlightenment, it was said that he would go there to give a discourse to his mother and those in attendance. And so at the beginning it describes, and it goes quite in detail of beings that come from throughout the various realms of existence. He talks about Bodhisattvas, about all these sentient beings that come to listen to the Dharma. And in this sutra, the Buddha is talking to one of the main Bodhisattvas named Manjushri. And he asked Manjushri, he says, look at all these people or all these beings that have come to listen to the Dharma. And he asked him, he says, can you estimate about how many people are gathered here today? And the Manjushri says, even with all the powers that I have, there was such a multitude of people here, I can't begin to estimate how many there are. Sort of like my Dharma talks, there's so many that attend that I can't, I'm kidding, joking, okay. But, so the Buddha then says to Manjushri, I agree, even with my powers, I can't begin to estimate the number of sentient beings who have gathered here. Then he goes on to say to Manjushri, in fact, that all the people that have gathered were actually liberated from suffering through the compassionate working of Ksitagarbha Bodhisattva. And so, having heard this, Manjushri asks the Buddha to elaborate. He says, I can understand that, but, for the people of the future, please elaborate on this Ksitagarbha Bodhisattva, or Jizō Bosatsu in Japanese. So the Buddha then begins to tell him, and this is an interesting thing about Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. They talk about many past lives. Okay, so the Buddha begins by saying at one time this Ksitagarbha Bodhisattva was a son of a respected elder. And he came to under the guidance of a Buddha named Lion Power. And he asked the Buddha, when this young fellow was, I guess, overwhelmed by this Buddha Lion Power. And he asked him, how did you become such a great Buddha? And Lion Power tells him, well, you have to create a great vow, something that you create, and then you have to practice for a very, very long time. And when your practices are fulfilled, you can become a Buddha. So this young fellow then makes a vow, and he proclaims, I now determine to relieve the suffering of beings in the 6 realms of sufferings and sorrow, skillfully leading them to liberation through innumerable kalpas before I myself will attain Buddhahood. Okay? So this, at that point, this young fellow makes this vow. And it's said from this vow, this young fellow, who then becomes this Kshitigarbha Bodhisattva, is said to be the protector or the person who will save beings in the 6 realms from the time when the historical Buddha passed away until the introduction of what we call Maitreya Bodhisattva, who will become the next Buddha. Okay, and that's supposed to take place depending on your denomination. It varies a little bit. Some of them talk about 5-6 billion years afterwards. Some talk about 10 million years afterwards. So it depends on the denomination. There's interpretations that vary. But in the Buddhist cosmology, it said that when the Buddha passed away, there are certain periods. So the first 500 years is called the right Dharma age. And then the next 1,000 years was known as the semblance Dharma age. And then the next 10,000 years, according to many studies, is said to be what they call the last Dharma age. And then at the end of that period, where is the extinction of the Dharma of Shakyamuni Buddha. And at that time, then the next Buddha will come out. And that's said to be this Maitreya Bodhisattva. And so this Jizo Bosatsu or Kshitigarbha is said to be protecting the beings in the 6 realms of suffering, the realms of samsara, during the time of the demise of the Buddha till the next Buddha. Okay, so basically helping out the Buddha, helping individuals attain enlightenment. So that's the first story he tells Manjushri. And then he goes on to say yet at another time, this Kshitigarbha was actually a Brahmin girl named Sacred Daughter. And she lived many kalpas ago, and she was, in fact, very devoted to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Unfortunately, her mother was not, and she was very much against the 3 treasures and openly uttered slanderous remarks against the 3 treasures. So when the mother passed away, she ends up entering what we call a VC hell, one of the hot realms of hell. And her daughter, knowing of her mother's evil ways while she was alive, feared for her destination. And in order to aid her suffering, it's said that the Sacred Daughter gave up all her worldly possession, made offerings to the Buddha called Buddha, flower of meditation and enlightenment. And she sat and meditated and contemplated on the Buddha for a long period of time, when suddenly she hears a voice saying, "Do not mourn in sorrow," and that the Buddha will allow her, aid her to go and see where her mother is. And so he tells her to go home and meditate on her mother. And so she does this, and the following night she sees a vision. Suddenly she's in this realm of hell. And she begins to see all these beings suffering in anguish in this realm. And she then encounters the king of that realm, called King No Poison. And the king recognizes that this sacred daughter is actually a person that doesn't belong in hell, because she does good meritorious deeds. So he asks her, "What are you doing here?" And this is when she tells her that she's searching out her mother, who she understood led a very bad life while she was alive. And so now that she's passed on, she realizes she must be suffering here. And to this, the king, once the king finds out her mother's name, she says that not to worry, that in fact, because of this sacred daughter's pious activities, that in fact her mother has been liberated from this realm and is now in the heavenly realm. And so at first, Kshitigarbha, or the heavenly daughter, rejoices, but then she looks around and sees that there are still multitude of beings suffering in this realm. So she makes a vow to save them all. Okay, and again, this is one of the former incantations of this Kshitigarbha Bodhisattva. So then this Jizo is the true form of Enma, and sometimes, although Enma is seen as terrifying, in fact, when we look at it as Jizo, is in fact a compassionate, or not even God, but a compassionate bodhisattva. Okay, and Jizo has, in fact, in Japan, taken on the most prominent role of any of the countries, and is known as a guardian of unborn children, expected mothers, young children, travelers, as well as beings in the 6 realms of samsara, or suffering. So that means all of us, basically. But what's interesting about this is in Japan, it's taken on a whole culture of its own, and you'll see these statues all throughout Japan. Now, the one on the left here of the standing bodhisattva is actually the more traditional version. Now, Jizo is interesting because unlike other deities, a lot of the other deities are royally adorned, but Jizo is usually very simple, like a monk, okay, and is usually carrying a staff, and then what looks like a peach, it's actually a medicine, what do you call it, the container, okay, and one of the things I read from what is it, a Metropolitan Art Gallery, or one of the art galleries said that one of the other interesting aspects, if you look at the Jizo, a lot of the times they'll have a very long earlobe, okay, with a very large hoop in it, which showed that at one time they were wearing very heavy earrings, which meant that they gave up the worldly adornments to take on this role of a monk. Okay, so now when you look at the Jizo Bosatsu, it's got this plain robes of a monk. Okay? Now, over time, this Jizo became associated around the 14 and 1500s. There started the folklore came up about Jizo, and the fact that he was the protector of children and unborn children, and miscarried children, and even aborted children. And there's a whole story that lore that goes along with the fact that, so it was said, and there's 2 different versions of it, that if a fetus is aborted or miscarried, or if a child dies within the first 2 years, that they have not been able to create enough good karma to carry them on to a better next existence. So so these, what happens, it's said in this folklore, is that these children end up in a place. They call it Sai no Kawara, which is the banks beside the Sanzu no Kawa. Sanzu no Kawa is like the river Styx, okay? And they can't cross that river because they haven't created enough good karma, okay? And so when they get to these banks, and it's quite graphic, as their penance, these children have to build these little stone pillars. They have to stack pebbles, right, up. And one of the reasons is that they hope they can stack the pebbles to get out of this sort of hellish realm into a better place. Okay, so when you see these Jizo statues in Japan, you see them all over the place. Often you'll see little stacks of pebbles beside them that people have placed. And that is the parents mourning for the loss of their child and trying to help them get up further. But as they're stacking these pebbles, it said the oni, or the ogres, come and they use their iron clubs to knock down the stacks of pebbles as well as they beat the children. As I said, it's very graphic and not so nice. So in comes this Jizo Bosatsu, the Bodhisattva, the protector of the children, and it's said that one thing that he'll do is sometimes he has very long sleeves and he hides the children in his sleeves as he carries them across. Okay, and so basically Jizo is the one that protects the children. So the parents pay homage to Jizo, asking for his protection. And often you'll see them wearing these little red bibs with knitted hats, right? So the background behind this is that the red was actually the color used to ward off evil and sickness in Japan. So it was also used, so these little bodhisattvas, when the newborn baby was born, they would go not only for protecting the dead, but also for the newborn baby to make sure that they won't get sick or get ill. They would put these red bibs and red hat on. Incidentally, again, going off tangent here, you know that in Japan, when somebody turns 60, it's a very important year for them, okay? Kanneki, they call it. Wait, oh no, Mari already became 60 a couple of years ago, so you guys are past that. But so when one turns 60, and the reason why 60 is very important, does everybody know of the Chinese Zodiac? Like there are 12 different animals, right? I'm the year of the dragon. I like my Chinese Zodiac much better than my Western Zodiac because I'm a Virgo in the West, September, but I'm a dragon in the East. And a dragon sounds much cooler than a virgin princess, right? So anyways, but so there are 12 different animals. And by the way, the dragon is the only mythological animal of the 12 the Chinese zodiac animals. But there are 12 animals. But did you know that there were 5 different types of each one? So there is it is fire, earth, water, wood, and ether. Okay. So even if you're, let's say, a horse, okay, year of the horse, right? You can be a earth horse or a wood horse or a fire horse. And incidentally, they say never marry a woman that is a fire horse. That's not me saying it. That's an old tradition, okay? Because they say they're very strong-willed, okay? Anyways, that's not me. That's not my. That's an old adage that's said. Okay. Anyways, so there are 5 different types of each Chinese zodiac animals. Therefore, okay, for you to become the exact same animal as the year you're born, it takes 60 years for the cycle. You get it? So 12 times 5 different, right, equals 60. So that's why when you're 60, you become the exact same zodiac animal. So if you're a fire dragon, let's say, it takes 60 years to come around. Okay, so they're saying that's one cycle that you've gone through. And so you're starting off the new cycle. And again, when you turn 60, you're supposed to be wearing something red. And that also has this same background as this ojizo, the bibs and the hat, to ward off illness and evil spirits when you turn 60. Okay, so for longevity, basically, right? Anyways, but because this Jizo Bosatsu became associated with miscarriages and more recently with abortions as well. Reverend Taitetsu Uno wrote a fascinating article many years ago now in the Tricycle magazine on the role of Jizo Bosatsu in modern Japan, and how that this role played a very important function in order to aid unwed or unwanted pregnancies or unexpected pregnancies, or it aided those individuals who had to get an abortion for whatever reason it may be to move on with their life. And what happens, and you go to the temples, it's actually very, very sad. You can go to the temples and you'll see these Jizo statues, and they'll often have, these ones are red bibs, and you'll find bibs of all different sorts. And often there'll be messages from the mother to the aborted child saying, I'm so sorry, I just couldn't have you in my life at this time. So it's a very interesting way of how society is dealing with it. It's not, it realizes that the person that is grieving the most in that situation is in fact the mother that had to go through all that. And so this is one way for her to deal with that loss. As opposed to saying abortion is right or wrong, or they just have a way to deal with it, and this is through this Jizo Bosatsu. But also, so you'll find this statue in many different places. Sometimes you'll find it beside the roadside. If a child may have been involved in an accident, like sometimes we see flowers on the roadside. There are people that actually have put up little statues of the Jizo Bosatsu there. But also they're known as the guardian of travelers, so you'll find them throughout Japan. And one of the places, to me, it's personally, I find it to be one of the most beautiful places in Japan, is a place where you have these Jizo Bosatsu. Okay, this is in Nikko. Now, Nikko is very famous for the Toshogu, which is the burial grounds for, I can't remember which, one of the shoguns. I think it was Tokugawa. I could be wrong, but I believe it was Tokugawa. Anyways, Nikko is very famous for this beautiful temple there. And one of the most famous carvings in this temple is on one of the temple buildings, there's the 3 statues of the monkeys. See no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. So that's a very famous statue. But a little bit away from this temple, on a sort of an off-beaten track, and I happened to find this, when was that? 1996, I think, by accident. We had taken a group of youth to Japan on a youth trip, and one morning, myself and my cousin Akira was actually the chaperone. We went for a morning walk. We were staying at this little inn, and we went for a little walk, and there was this little signage to this temple called Jiunji. So we went to this. It's not a big temple or anything, but at the back of this temple was this path, and I think it's the most beautiful spot I've ever seen in Japan. And since then, I've seen this in various Buddhist books. But you'll see, so on one side, it's lined with these bodhisattvas, Jizo bodhisattvas, okay? And on the other side of that is this beautiful river that runs down. And actually, Tomoko-san, she was with us in 2016 when we went. So we had the opportunity to go revisit that spot, but it's probably one of the most tranquil places that you could find in Japan. And the nice thing about it is because it's off the beaten track, it's not full of tourists, unless like us. We went. I took our group there, but it's very serene. And again, these are all the bodhisattvas protecting the travelers. So back then, there would have been pilgrims that walked to Nikko to pay homage to the shrine. And so on the way, as they would come this way, these bodhisattvas will be there to greet them. And they're all, as you can see, they're all a little different. Each is, and a lot of it has to do with weathering. I mean, you can see this one here, the head's completely gone, right? But somebody still put a little cap on it. But they're all, because of the weathering, they all change differently. And impermanence, as well as constant change, but truly beautiful. But these statues remind me, and it's one of my favorite folklore that's told on New Year's about in Japan, and it's called Kasajizo. And Kasajizo, so in this story, it starts off with an elderly couple, very poor elderly couple, and they don't have enough money to have a great New Year's feast. So in Japan, New Year's is a very important time of year, and there's traditionally you have this feast every year. Every food that you eat is very symbolic. But this old couple, they don't have enough money. So near the year end, the husband, he makes these straw hats, like the one you see Shinran Shonin wearing often, the straw hats. And he decides to go and sell them down at the village. So he goes, but everybody in the village is getting ready, preparing for their New Year's feast, and nobody wants to give him the time of day. So he's unable to sell his hats. And as the day wears on, this is the middle of winter, it starts getting colder and it starts snowing. And he decides he better go back to his house. So it's quite a journey to go back to their house. And he's going on, and along the way he encounters these jizo. And there's 6 of them. And I'll mention the importance of 6 afterwards. But so he looks at them and he says, I'm grateful that every day you're standing there, rain or shine or snow, you stand there guarding over all the travelers. And he begins to take out the straw hats that he couldn't sell, and he starts putting it on their heads. right? Covering the heads of the Jizo one by one. But he only had five hats. So for the last Jizo, the old man takes off his scarf and he wraps it around his head to protect him. And he goes home. And he tells his wife, he says, I'm sorry I couldn't sell any of our straw hats. And she said, but where are they? And he said, well, I saw the Ojizo-sama, the Jizo Bosatsu, and I realized how grateful I am to them. And so I gave my hats to them. And his wife is very happy. She says, we'll do with what we have. But at night, they're sitting around the hearth, and the wife hears a strange sound. And it goes, dong, dong, dong. And she says, husband, do you hear that sound? And he's a little hard of hearing, so it takes him a little longer, but he begins to hear it too. And they're kind of worried. They're thinking, what's making that noise? And it's getting closer and closer and closer. And so finally, it sounds like it's right in front of their house, and it stops. And then it starts going away. They could hear again, fainter and fainter. And the wife nudges the husband and says, go and see who it was. So the husband goes to the door and opens it up, and there in front of them is some mochi, the rice cakes, and some other stuff for New Year's. And in the distance, he could see the six Jizo with their hats. So this is a very famous folklore story that's told at the New Year's. And it's always, to talk about compassion and sharing. But the reason why there's actually six is because, as I mentioned earlier, this Ksita was mentioning about they will protect the beings in the six realms of suffering. And so this is that. That's why there's six of them, to represent each of the six realms. And so sometimes when you see this one statue here, okay, this one only has a couple, but many of these Jizo Bosatsu will have a staff with 6 rings on it. And again, the 6 representing the 6 realms of suffering. So this Jizo Bosatsu, or Kishitagarba Bosatsu, is not only the protector of the afterlife, but also, and basically it plays a significant role, not so much in our Jodo Shinshu per se, but in Pure Land Buddhism. It's said that this Jizo Bosatsu, or Kishitagarba, is guiding those beings in the realms of suffering to Amida's Pure Land. So it takes a very important role in Pure Land's teachings. So Jodo Shu emphasizes it much more than Jodo Shinshu, which we are part of. Okay. So that's what I wanted to, again, I hijacked today's class because I thought this was a very interesting topic and get to know. So if you ever go to Japan and you see these statues, now you'll know what the meaning behind it. And if you have the opportunity to read, although I don't know if you'll ever find one with English writing on it, it's probably Japanese, but some of the tales that these mothers leave behind on these statues are very, very sad. But it's a very quiet way for them to be able to move on with their sorrow, I guess. I don't think it means that it disappears, but it allows them to at least have something tangible, concrete to deal with it. So, are there any questions?
have a question, but I have a comment about part of that story. Culturally, that must be really sad when a woman decides that she wants to or needs to have an abortion, to maybe have that thought that the baby kind of takes the punishment.
Yeah, so it's a strange take on things that, but again, I mean that it is what it is. I agree with you. It is a very strange way of looking at it, but that's how. Well, so karma is looked upon very importantly in Buddhism. So your actions create merit, and so even interestingly enough, they say it is actually not the parent's choice to have the child, but it is the child that selects the parents in Asia. So it's your previous karma that leads you to whichever parents you have. Okay, and so yeah, I hear you very much, and I find it kind of odd that it seems like um, the the child has done something wrong for being aborted, and it's just like that doesn't seem to make sense from our.
Do you think that any of those stories were told to sort of pressure people to not do that?
Maybe could be. I never thought of it.
Like a really horrible guilt trip?
It could be.
Mm.
Yeah, I I'm at a loss. I would know. Yeah, it could be, could be. And thank you for the comment, Junichi-san. Yes, it was Tokugawa Ieyasu. So, yeah. Any other comments or questions or thoughts? No. Junichi-san, do you have anything you want to add to that? You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, this abortion issue is quite an interesting question, but now we understand, of course, that, as you said, child selects parents. So that is not how to say, it's not sad itself as itself. But anyway, we're not fully understood what's the question, but
Yeah, so and actually in other schools of Buddhism, they actually they call it mizuko kuyo, and that is a service that they hold for the aborted child. But it's the interpretation or understanding of that is that you are holding that service so that they can absolve themselves of the sin that they did of dying. And so in Jodo Shinshu, we actually don't do mizuko kuyo. Because we actually look at it a little differently. And I've actually had, on a couple occasions, I have done services for people who have had miscarriages. And the way we look at it is all those who go before us are actually our spiritual parents. So even an unborn child can be our spiritual parent in the sense that they guide us, they teach us. Through their passing, they teach us the truth, the reality of impermanence. And yet at the same time, they also teach us that we are within the embrace of oneness. So even though they have passed on, they are no longer our child, but they're actually our teachers. They're from the perspective of passing on, they're more experienced than we are. You see, because we're still here. Okay,
Mhm.
so therefore they become our guides. They become our teachers. So in Japanese, in Jodo Shinshu, we call it Zen Chishiki. They can be the guide that Zen Chishiki is a good friend or teacher who leads you to the Dharma. And so, in fact, even an unborn child can lead you to the Dharma. And there was Oka, I can't remember her first name. There was a Japanese lady who spoke at one of the women's conventions, World Buddhist Women's Convention, and she was talking about her 13-year-old son who committed suicide. And, her husband was a Korean national, born and raised in Japan. But in Japan, there's still quite a bit of discrimination, especially towards people of Korean descent. And so she and her husband had quite a rough life, or rough marriage because of the discrimination. So they worked very, very hard to overcome the discrimination and to create a warm household, if you will. And so they had the son, and she thought that everything was wonderful. But after he committed suicide, she found his diary, and in there he said, "This house is so cold." And she realized that at that time that they've been working so hard to provide for him materialistically. They created a house, but not a home. Like they didn't want him to suffer as they did, so they tried the hardest, and they basically provided all the materialistic goods, but they were never home because they were working so hard. And so he felt very empty and committed suicide. And after he committed suicide, her husband turned to Buddhism, and for the longest time she couldn't figure out why. She thought Buddhism was all hokey, and she couldn't figure out why he would do that. But she started going to some of the Jodo Shinshu gatherings, and it was there that she encountered the Dharma, and she was feeling sorry for herself. And it was only then at one of these gatherings that another of the ladies said, "You're not alone, that we all experience this." And she realized that up until that time, she had only been thinking about herself. And then she realized that through her son's passing, that in fact, he had become her great teacher. And she became a very devout follower. So in our Jodo Shinshu understanding, those who go before us are our spiritual teachers or our parents. And so even an unborn child can be our teacher, our guide. Okay. Any other questions or comments? No? Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very